So yeah, welcome back everybody to week 5. So we're a little bit over halfway through the course. So what we're going to do to begin with is we'll just do a little breathing space just for a couple of minutes. So you might like to close your eyes. And just becoming aware, first of all, being aware of where you are. So a sense of the space that you're sitting in. And then being aware of your body. Notice the way your body isn't a thing, it's a whole collection of experiences and sensations. Being aware of thoughts as well. Just noticing the content of your thinking and the quality of your thinking. In other words, is it fast or slow? Is it painful or pleasant? Is it all jumbled up, or is there a connected theme running through it? And then tuning into your breathing. So it's probably easiest to start by attending to the breathing where you feel it moving in your abdomen, so low down in your body. And again, your breathing isn't a thing either. It's a whole collection of sensations and experiences. So just gathering your attention around the breath. And then beginning to expand out again. So being aware of the different parts of your body, being aware of your face, your shoulders, the room, and also remembering or connecting with the fact that there's 50 or so other people in different parts of Ireland, all tuning into this class. So just to having a sense of everybody as well. And then just bringing the practice to a close in your own time. So, in terms of this morning's class, week 5, we'll be starting in a few moments with a practice of the Metta Bhavana. And then we'll have our home groups, and then we'll have a break. And then I'm going to introduce the theme for this week, which is spiritual death. So we'll find out what that means at that point. And then, as we've done in previous weeks, we'll finish the morning by setting up our practice for the coming week. So I wanted to say, just before we do the Metta Bhavana, just say a few words about the Metta Bhavana. And usually when we do the Metta Bhavana, we go into it with this idea, which is suggested by the name Metta Bhavana, which means development of loving kindness, that we're developing this quality of metta. So we ourselves are bringing something into being and developing it. And that's a really good way of thinking about the Metta Bhavana. It's a really good approach. But there's another way we can approach it. And I want to just read you a little poem which is strongly suggestive of this approach. So that this is a little poem by Sangharakshita. It's called Life is King. Hour after hour, day after day, we try to grasp the ungraspable, pinpoint the unpredictable. Flowers wither when touched. Ice suddenly cracks beneath our feet. Vainly, we try to track bird flight through the sky, trace dumb fish through deep water, try to anticipate the earned smile, the soft reward, even try to grasp our own lives. But life slips through our fingers like snow. Life cannot belong to us. We belong to life. Life is king. So what this poem suggests is like a profound letting go into life, and particularly a letting go of this idea that we can grasp it or possess it or own it. And when we do the Metta Bhavana, we really get into this kind of sensitivity to life, to the life that exists in us and the life that exists in others. And we can begin to be more and more receptive when we do the practice. So more and more just basically open to the life that's around us. Particularly this comes out in the last stage, where we kind of feel that connection we have with all other living beings and the fact that we're kind of knitted into the fabric of life. And then the practice becomes as much about surrendering to that as it is about cultivating something. So I just wanted to, the way I'm going to lead it a little bit, not very much, but just a little bit, just to suggest this approach of letting go into or surrendering to a force in a way that's already there, rather than making something ourselves, if you see what I mean. So that's just a little orientation that we'll carry into the Metta Bhavana as we do it this morning. So if you'd like to set yourselves up for meditation, and we'll start when everybody's ready. So just allowing yourself to relax into your meditation posture. Being aware of your surroundings. And again, just being aware of all the other people who are part of this course. So psychically and emotionally, we're together, even though physically we're apart. So we feel that keenly, but we're also connected psychically and emotionally to other people who aren't part of this Zoom call, but who are part of our lives as we are part of their lives. And what we're going to do to begin with is just tune into the life within us, the life within our own body to begin with. So beginning to tune into the sensations in the body, in the face, letting the face just hang, the eyes rest, the jaw soft, the scalp spread, feeling the relationship between the head and the neck and the body. How are we holding our head? Are we pushing our chin forward? Is there tension? What about the shoulders, the arms, the hands? And letting that awareness soak down into the chest, the back, the middle part of our trunk, the belly. The pelvis, the bottom, the genital region, the legs, the feet. So a sense of sensitivity and openness to the body, the life in our body, not just in terms of sensation, but also in terms of energy. We might have a feeling of energy or lack of energy. So tuning into that as well. Vitality or lack of vitality. And we'll notice that some of our body feels pleasant, some of it might feel painful. Bringing kindness to the pleasure, kindness to the pain. So we can say, may I be well. So may pleasure and well-being, energy and vitality increase within me. That's what we're wishing. May I be well. the life within us is not just physical, there's also the non-physical part of our life. Emotion, desire, impulse, it all is reflected in our body, but it appears non-physical. There's awareness, there's consciousness itself that wants to expand, that wants to be free. So we can say, may I be happy. May I be free from suffering. Or if you prefer, may I be free. And may I grow and develop. So may that life within me come to its fullest flowering. May I grow and develop. And then bring into mind a good friend. Sensitive to the life in them. So part of the life in them is their physical experience. And just feeling that, knowing that it's real for your friend. And that might be enough for an attitude of metta to begin to flower. Or if you wish, you could use the phrases. metta for your friend. And then just letting go of your friend and just sitting with whatever is arising. Feeling the breath moving in the abdomen, feeling the movement in the mind and thoughts and emotion and impulse. And then introducing into the flow an evocation of the neutral person. So remembering to choose one particular person and decide to stay with them for the next few minutes. Sensitive to the life within them, less familiar to us, less interesting to us, perhaps, but no less real for that. No less real for that other person. And then again, just letting go of the evocation of that person, and just being with yourself as you are, being with what's going on, just being with life as it's arising within you and for you. Feeling the heart area in particular, feeling what's going on there. And then bringing to mind someone that you find difficult. So the painful, difficult, frustrating aspects of life is what we evoke when we evoke the difficult person. And again, just being open, not just to the feeling, but also being open to the fact that there's another independent person there, being sensitive to the life within them, as well as feeling the difficulty. And just letting metta flow towards the difficult person. It might help to think in terms of just letting go of whatever's going on rather than trying to cultivate something, to cultivate metta. So rather just, you might think in terms of letting go of the grievance. If it's in the body, softening into it, relaxing into it, surrendering to the reality that their life is as real and valid as your life is. And then including each of the four people, so moving into the fifth stage. Yourself, your friend, the neutral person, the difficult person. Firstly, refreshing your awareness of them, and then equalizing your metta. So the life is, as it were, equal in each person. So we respond to each equally because of that. And then including more and more people and opening to the life that's in them. Just letting go into the reality of the lives of others. And just broadening out what you think of, what you include in life, to include people that you don't know, people in other parts of the world, and other living beings as well. So not just human life, but there's so much life in the world that's not human. So trying to bring that to mind also. We're part of that. We're part of that life. So life doesn't belong to us. We belong to life. Life is king. And then just sitting. Okay, so we'll move into the home groups now. And we'll have a little bit longer this week. So I gather from the group leaders that, in a way, there's a lot to talk about. And so I think it's really worth taking the time just to talk about what's live for you in relation to what we've been practicing. So we'll have a little bit longer, a few more minutes this morning. And just to remind you what the home practice items were from last week's class. So this week we were to, in terms of the mindful walk, the breathing space, the mindful meal, just notice what state you're in, whether it's a skillful state or an unskillful state. To continue with the gratitude list and focusing on friendship in terms of making friends and deepening existing friendships. And then I was encouraging you to do the Metta Bhavana. So in terms of the questions for this week, and again, you don't have to follow these slavishly, the questions. It's just to get a conversation going, really. So firstly, just being clear about what you took on to practice. Secondly, did you notice any patterns of skillful or unskillful mental states? So that's part of what we're trying to do by developing awareness, is developing this noticing of patterns. Because when we notice patterns, we can begin to unravel them if they're unskillful patterns. And then anything that you noticed or learned about your friendships, about your attitude to even the notion of friendship, maybe. Sometimes there can be a lot in that. And then fourthly, if you've got time, just how the meditation's going, anything that's arising in the meditation. But again, just using those as jumping off points if you want. But if there's something else you want to talk about that feels more live, just go with that. So Daniel, if you can set the groups going, that would be great. So some meaty questions, which is great. Let me see here. So I think there's a question about the parenting course, and I think Daniel's responded to that in the text box. Yeah, that's great. From Laura, myself and everyone in my group really enjoyed that Metta Bhavana and felt we could go very deep with it. Would it be possible to extract it from the recording into a standalone Metta Bhavana recording? I struggle with it usually and really felt able to connect with this one. So if you go onto when you get the YouTube link, if you go onto the YouTube video, underneath the video there's timestamps, and you can click on the timestamp. It'll say Metta Bhavana, and it'll just go straight to the lead meditation. So you'll be able to, if you want to follow that lead through again, you can do that. Maybe just to say, I mean, there's lots of different ways of approaching the Metta Bhavana, and one of the things I think that often gets in the way, I was almost going to say usually gets in the way, but I don't know about usually, but often, is an overly kind of forceful attitude to the practice, which actually kind of squeezes the life out of it. So most of us, I think, with Metta Bhavana need to be a lot more receptive. So I'll have something more to say about that later, but what I try to emphasize in that is just being receptive, just being really open to the life that's in the other person, rather than feeling like we have to kind of force some kind of attitude onto the situation, which is how we often approach it, and the phrases, if they're taken too kind of literally, can exacerbate that. You kind of force this metta on top of things rather than letting metta as an attitude emerge from a deep receptivity to the life that's around you. In a way, metta is a deep receptivity to the life that's around you. So hopefully that answers your question, rather. And then there's a question from Sangashura. Could you please go into how to move forward if you disagree with the view being communicated in the text? A couple of people in the group have been challenged to the extent of being turned off rather than inspired. How do they approach this challenge? Well, one thing is to just look at it in terms of proportion. There's some things in the book that I'm not sure I agree with. But I know that there's like the vast majority of what's in the book I find deeply helpful and very well put. So I think that's what one thing to think about is that, well, okay, so there's a few things that you don't, if you don't agree with, or you don't, you think is wrong. But maybe it's just a matter of focusing on what is of benefit and not worrying too much about what you find disagreeable. And I think that probably points to a tendency that we have to overemphasize the negative, to overemphasize what we find difficult. And what that can do is it can actually annihilate what's of benefit. And we have that expression, cutting off your nose to spite your face, and that's maybe a bit strong, but I think it's important to try and come to the things that we find difficult in life. This is a general point, really, from the things that we appreciate, particularly when there's difficulties with a person. Often, even if it's someone we love and who's really benefited us, it's really quite alarming how we can get it all out of proportion. So that's one possible approach, is just to sort of try and take it in proportion. So, well, okay, there's a lot of things in this book that have been of benefit to me. There's a few things that I don't like. So I'll just focus on the things that I do appreciate. I suppose another thing to think about is just in a way the disagreements, or the challenges, just to sort of try and hold them kind of lightly. I mean, interestingly, I think often it's where you really disagree with something that there's the most. It's actually where you can learn the most. Not necessarily just saying that you're wrong and the book is right, but often where we really feel a lot of emotion or aversion or something to something, that's when we can really learn something. We can if we're willing to go into it, if we're willing to stay with that. So that's the other thing I'd say. There's probably more that could be said. If you've got more questions, or just throw them at me. So this is from Olivia. You said that you belong to life and life doesn't belong to you. I realize you mean that we should stop thinking of some experiences as something we have to put up with by putting ourselves at the center of things. However, if we just let things happen, don't we risk realizing that we can influence the course in a more skillful way? Yeah, actually, I might return to that question, actually, because that's going to be a springboard for what I want to talk about next. But I see what you're saying. A question came up in our group. This is from Mihal, about the tension between wanting to develop deeper spiritual friendships with people on the path and realizing many of our pre-existing friends are not interested in this. Can you say something about how we can ensure metta and curiosity in our friends while also carving the time and effort to develop spiritual friendships? Yeah, that's a really meaty question. Like, on the one hand, we don't want to ditch all of our friends, because that's not very nice. And also, we need to honor that friendships and connections happen at different levels. So it's really valuable to actually have friends, and to have friends who you've known for all through your life. And that's got, and then it's also valuable to have friends who share your aspiration. It's invaluable, actually, to have that. And sort of negotiating the tension between those things is just difficult. Because we've only got so much time, and if we start spending time with new people, the people that we used to spend time with will feel that. So it's a tricky area. I think probably everybody experiences this when they enter into a sort of, well, any kind of new relationship. But if you enter into a new relationship, say in something like a spiritual community, it can be awkward. One thing is to try and we're just trying to tell people what you're up to, and ideally, if you have new friends meet old friends, people, because I think sometimes people can get a bit weirded out by, if you're getting involved in a spiritual community, it can look a bit kind of well, people get quite disconcerted by that, because it can seem cultish or something like that. But it's probably a good idea just to tell friends what you're doing and why you're doing it, recognizing the fact that not everybody is going to understand. They're not going to necessarily appreciate why you're doing what you're doing. Hopefully that answers your question. But I think it's just worth pointing out that it is awkward, actually. And it's really, I'm, you know, like, it's on the one hand, we might need to let go of certain things. On the other hand, you know, having connections shouldn't be deep connections with people that have been formed perhaps over many years shouldn't be kind of tossed aside thoughtlessly, which I've done that a little bit in the past, but I've still got lots of friends, maybe not lots, but I've got a good few friends who I made before I got involved in Buddhism, and who aren't particularly interested in Buddhism, but are still really valuable connections that I have. There's one question here. I do morning pages journaling as part of my routine and often end up venting some very negative emotions. Will giving an outlet to this interfere with metta? Not necessarily, I would say. I mean, I think sometimes, in a way, like I was saying this, I think the last couple of weeks, or maybe last week or the week before, that part of the value of like something like journaling is just actually externalizing what's in our mind. I remember talking to a friend about this, and he was saying that, you know, he was thinking things. He was actually, as he was thinking them, he was thinking as well, I don't agree with that. So he was sort of disagreeing with his own thoughts, which is kind of an interesting situation to be in. So I think actually just venting, as it were, or, you know, offloading negative thoughts onto a piece of paper might be quite a valuable thing to do. And then you can get a bit of perspective, a bit of objectivity on them. Doing it with another person can also sometimes be necessary, but one needs to be quite careful about that, I think. Just giving vent. I think the difference probably is if you're giving vent, if you're trying to see what the deeper patterns are, and if you're trying to sort of overcome the unskillful pattern, that would be a beneficial thing. But if you're just venting because you need to kind of get it out, but you've no interest in trying to understand what's going on and move things forward, then that's probably just going to have a negative outcome. So I think that's probably the difference, just thinking off the top of my head. So I just wanted to return to this question that Olivia has. So you said that you belong to life and life doesn't belong to you. I realize you mean that we should stop thinking of some experiences as something we have to put up with by putting ourselves at the center of things. However, if we just let things happen, don't we risk not realizing that we can influence the course in a more skillful way? So this is this kind of problem in a way that that we get with the Dharma life, which is that we, first of all, to get us going, we need to have a sense of agency. So we talked about that in terms of the stage of integration. So we need to really know that we can actually positively influence the course of our life. And, you know, no doubt we've seen that over the course of the few weeks that we've, you know, we've put certain things into practice, and probably we've started to reap the benefits of that. We've started to be a little bit more even-minded, a little bit more emotionally positive, perhaps, through the stage of positive emotion. So through putting our effort, we start to feel more ourselves. We start to feel a sense of potency. We start to become more sensitive to others, and that will make our life go better. You know, if we're more sensitive to other people, if we're aware of them, we'll get along better with them, and our life will just go better. We won't get into so many scrapes with other people. But so this is what the stage of integration and positive emotion is about. It's about becoming a sort of a stronger, more courageous, more emotionally robust, more genuinely responsive kind of person who can, you know, take things on and follow them through, who can be reliable and who can be relied upon, and so on. So that's what the stage of integration of positive emotion. That's what those two stages sort of enable us to do. However, it's still all about us in a way. So at the center of all of that is this notion of me and my life and my development and so on. And that's not to be despised. That's not to be sniffed at. It's quite a significant thing. But the stage of spiritual death is going a stage further than that. And it's beginning to investigate this notion that we have of things being mine. So this is the way the Buddha often talks about it or approaches it. He approaches it in terms of the notion of ownership. So we relate to life in terms of, well, we say my life. And when we say my life, we really mean that. That it's my life, it's my relationships, it's my friendships, it's my meditation. It's my development, it's my growth, it's my career, it's my mind. And we really believe that we can own it. We really believe that we can kind of own our little corner of life and sort of defend it from everybody else. So that's what that poem, Life is King, is kind of getting at. It's kind of saying that actually we can't do that. It just doesn't work. We can't own life because it's not under our control. So this is one of the sort of approaches that the Buddha takes to this question is to start to investigate, well, what do we really have control over? He sort of talks about the body. We can't control our body. We can have some influence and significant influence, but we can't stop ourselves from getting ill, ultimately. We can't stop ourselves from dying. So we don't actually own our body. If we really owned it, we could control it. We could make it do what we wanted it to do. Even our mind, while again we have significant influence on it, we can't control everything that arises within it. And part of that is because we can't control our external environment. It's really interesting, something like this coronavirus. It's a crisis, a kind of global crisis. One of the things that's really struck me about it is that it affects absolutely everybody and quite deeply. So everybody has a response to that. It's impossible to ignore it. I don't know about other countries, but certainly in this country, I can't imagine there's a single person in the country who is able to just pretend that it's not happening. You can do that with other things, I'm sure. You could do that with Brexit, maybe. You could just pretend that it's not happening and just get on with your life. And when you hear about it, you could just turn the other way. But with coronavirus and all the impact it's had, you can't do that. So you need to actually, it affects your mind. So we can't control that. We can't even control what's in our mind. And actually that's to realize that it's not a kind of a sense of weakness or recognizing a weakness. It's more like a liberation. It's more like a sense when we free ourselves from the sort of the tyranny of everything having to be about me. It's actually freedom. It's freedom because we can then be genuinely responsive. So this seems to be the kind of space, to call it that the Buddha inhabited. The Buddha didn't have the sense of things being his. He didn't grasp at anything as being his. He wasn't attached to anything as being his. So he was just completely free just to enjoy life without this kind of tyranny of self, without everything having to be about him. And this is what the stage of spiritual death is about. It's about starting to let go of everything having to be about me, of everything having a sort of a reference back to self. I know there's a few questions and hands raised. Just give me a moment. If you have raised your hand, maybe it'd be easier if you type the question. So the death that's being talked about here is the death of this fixed view of self. It's quite dramatic language, really, death, to talk about it as death. But really, in order for growth to really happen, there does have to be a letting go. There does have to be a dying. We do have to move on. So that one of the images that goes right back to the very earliest strata of Buddha's teachings is a teaching of the snake. It's a sutta, a discourse of the Buddha about the snake. And the Buddha talks about spiritual life as like a snake shedding its skin. He uses that metaphor of the development of qualities like, an ethical sensibility, of an integrated and positive mind, even of insight, as like a snake shedding its skin. So every time if a snake is to grow, if its body is to grow bigger, it needs to let go of its old skin in order to grow. And it's actually quite a difficult process. If there's videos online, it's quite interesting to watch it. The snake has to kind of coil itself around something kind of abrasive to free itself from its own skin. And in a way, that's what it could be like, when we're trying to make genuine spiritual development. It can feel like that. It can feel like quite a wrench to let go of the old. But the only way the snake can grow is by letting go of its old skin. And the only way that we can grow is by letting go of certain aspects of things that we're engaged in or things that we're preoccupied by. So for not just a kind of an upgrade, but a genuine sort of transcendence to take place, there needs to be this aspect of spiritual death. What also comes with spiritual death is spiritual rebirth. So in a way, you have to take both together. Well, we're going to look at spiritual rebirth in a couple of weeks' time, but really spiritual death and spiritual rebirth are kind of two sides of the same coin. So the rebirth is what arises in the space that is left by what we let go of. So it's the new life that the snake grows into, having let go of its old skin. So that's the rebirth element. And you might have already noticed this on the course, that new things have entered into your life because of the space that you've made, for example, but just by reducing input, for example, it creates a space where new things can emerge into your experience, into your life. So that's really what the stage of spiritual death is. Having developed, in a way, become a more robust, stronger, more integrated, more responsible person, we then begin to look deeply into this notion of self that we have and try and see that it is actually just that. It's just a notion. It doesn't correspond to reality. And that is liberation. That's a really important thing to remember, that we're freed from something which restricts us, which contains us, which limits us. So hopefully that answers your question, Olivia. So in a sense, both are important. We do need to exercise will. We do need to realize that our actions have consequences and that we need to act in a particular way to bring about a particular outcome. So that's, Metta Bhavana. We practice the development of loving kindness through sitting down, engaging with our experience in a particular way, bringing somebody else to mind, bringing another person to mind, developing. Then we get to a point where actually we need to let go of the will and in a way just let a space open up, and these, in a way, spiritual death kind of happens in that space. And really, spiritual life, Dharma life, is a kind of a dance. I was going to say a balance, but it's more of a dance between those two poles of exercising will, doing something particular, not giving rise to doubt, and then letting go and just being open. So this particularly comes out in the stage of spiritual receptivity. So hopefully you've been getting something out of those little essays at the end of the chapters about spiritual receptivity. But that's, in a way, spiritual receptivity provides the space within which spiritual death can happen. Someone's asked a meaty question. From a Buddhist perspective, what exactly does enlightenment mean? Well, you could say, just in terms, there's lots of ways of talking about enlightenment. So one way of talking about it is the complete cessation of that kind of egoistic grasping. So the complete cessation, the complete ending of that need, that hunger for everything to be organized around me. That's one way that it's sometimes put. So it's as if that, and that's a profound thing, because we're in the habit of thinking of everything as about me. That's why it's so difficult to make spiritual progress, to develop, is because we're trying to undo something that is a kind of like a mistake or an assumption that's really, really deep. It's sort of in a way below the level of consciousness. It's something sort of a sort of a deep topsy-turviness in our way of looking at things. That's why it's so difficult. And because we're in the habit of thinking in that way, everything that we do, we then appropriate to that sense of everything being about me. So that's why integration and positive emotion is not enough. We need to begin to unpick that basic assumption, and we do that partly, partly by being more responsive to others. That's one way we can start unpicking that thing. So that I've talked about this idea of self. The attitude or the action that corresponds to that is selfishness. And this is the first thing to practice, the first home practice element this week, is trying to be less selfish. Really, this is just another way of talking about generosity. Generosity, you could say, is the emotional equivalent to the understanding of the fact that there isn't anything fixed within our experience that we can grasp hold on to, with the emotional equivalent to this idea that we can't own anything. So if we really know that, if we really see that, if we really feel that, then the only natural response to everything around us and the other people around us is generosity. It'll just be the natural way that we are. We'll just be generous as a kind of an instinct. At the moment, that's not our instinct, so we need to practice. So the first sort of home practice item for this week is to be more generous. So I'll just share the other items for this week's practice. So yeah, that's the first thing, is just to be less selfish. It's kind of a general thing, but you might have already, through the practice of the gratitude journal, writing 5 things each day that you're grateful for, there might be a natural sense of how you might practice that. It's very, very general, so you might like to make that more specific during the course of your week. In the second item is in terms of the mindful walk, the breathing space, the mindful meal, whichever of those things you're doing, and just to remind you that you don't have to do all of them. You can if you want to, but it's just to remind you that it's important just to focus on something and doing it really, really thoroughly, rather than spreading yourself thinly over a lot of different practices. And with the mindful walk, with the breathing space, with the mindful meal, when you're being a little bit more mindful in a kind of concerted way, try to notice how we become locked onto this notion of self, onto this notion of things being about me. So I'll just say a few more words about that. So first of all, you can notice the mental proliferation, the prapancha. That's how we can kind of tell ourselves a story that all kind of revolves back around me. So a kind of habitual inner narrative. And start trying to recognize how we do that, and how actually that's painful to do that, and actually it's not very helpful. When we keep bringing everything back to ourselves, we tend to cut off from people, and that tends to make our life not go quite so well. So just noticing those narratives, and I think Owen made a point in the comment box there. What did you say? Important to know that you are in charge of your thoughts and that they are not in control of you. Yeah, that's actually a slightly different point. But yeah, just to note, well, one of the ways of recognizing that that they're not in control of you is just recognizing that thoughts are just thoughts. So we often take our thought, our story, our narrative about life as life itself, as truth even. So one of the things is just having a perspective on our thoughts, that they're not necessarily fact. It's like I was talking about my friend who was saying how, he disagreed with his own thoughts. He could see that they were just thoughts, that they weren't actually facts. They weren't necessarily facts. They might be facts in a way, the things you think might be true, but they're not necessarily true. Another way of noticing how we create self, we get locked onto self, as it were, is through physical tension. You can you can hold on, you can grip in the face, for example, or you sort of stick your chin forward when you're walking. It's like you lead from your chin rather than leading from your heart or your hips. Tension in the belly. Often tension is a kind of a gripping. It's a holding on. It's a grasping. And we can notice particularly as we notice when we meditate, how as we go deeper, we can start letting go of just these habits of gripping and holding onto self. So again, I'm connected with that as our posture, noticing the way that we're moving, and just noticing, negative states of mind. And actually noticing how if we're in a state of ill will or a craving or doubt, how there's usually a strong sort of self-reference within that. So that's the second point. And the third point, so that's, in terms of the mindfulness practices that we're doing outside of the meditation, just noticing those kind of narratives, noticing the tension, how we're holding our body, noticing our mind. And then the third thing is the meditation, which is I've written meditation, rightening, then letting go. So you could say the rightening is the bit where we try and cultivate something, whether it's through the Metta Bhavana or the mindfulness of breathing. We're kind of trying to bring about a particular kind of state of mind. And then what's really important is to relax, to sit completely still. So keep the meditation going, but just relax. Particularly relax the body. Yeah. So we direct our attention onto the mindfulness of breathing or the Metta Bhavana, and then we spend a bit of time just sitting. So this is, in a way, that poem "Life is King." That's what it's trying to evoke. Just an attitude towards experience of just allowing it to be, not making it happen. So we just sit. So that might be something you want to give a bit of attention to in the meditation, particularly at the end. Just sitting for a while afterwards, particularly if you've got a bit more time, just spending a bit of time just being there, just sitting, and not trying to do anything to or for or with anything. Just be open. And actually, just while I'm on the subject, that's one of the things we did in the meditation earlier with the Metta Bhavana, is at the end of each stage, before we went on to the following stage, we just sat for a little bit. It's quite important to do, I think. You bring to mind your friend, and before you bring to mind the neutral person, just be with yourself for a little while and check that you're not getting too kind of overly forceful with the practice. And one way of doing it is just to sit for a minute or half a minute and just be with yourself before you then enter into the next stage of the practice. Otherwise, it's quite easy for the Metta Bhavana to get a little bit kind of forceful. You'll notice, because you might start getting a pain in your head. So there's a question here so those are the three things basically. So first of all, being less selfish, and then noticing how you kind of create this narrative of everything being about me in the mindfulness practice, and then in the meditation, entering into that space of letting go at the end of the practice through just sitting. There's a few questions which I'm just going to respond to here. So Deborah says, I've noticed with ongoing practice, I'll just stop that sharing now. I've noticed with ongoing practice of the Metta Bhavana that insight into my behavior is deepening, especially around the difficult person and my part in those relationships. Is this an intended aspect of the practice? And if so, could you say a bit more about that? Thank you. Yes, it's absolutely an intended part of the practice. Well, partly part of it is we start seeing how we have an impact. We have an impact on others. Again, that's part of this notion of sort of selfishness, of us being. We actually think that we exist in some way outside of our relationships, and in a way, what we are as human beings is our relationships. We really don't see this. We literally think of ourselves as kind of completely separate, which is not to say that we don't have agency. And this is why it starts becoming a little bit difficult to talk about this, because it starts sounding like sort of passivity. But what we're trying to do is recognize that we have an effect, that what we do really matters, that it has an effect on others, because there isn't a hard and fast sort of separation between ourselves and others, that we are part of life, as life is part of us. So it's quite natural that when you start seeing that, it changes the nature of your relationships with others. And this is a really important aspect of spiritual death. It's not just about a transformation in the way that we see things. It's about a transformation in the way that we are in the world. So for Buddhism, there's no sort of distinction between who we are and what we do. Who we are is what we do. I'll just say that again. So who we are is what we do. It's a sum total of what we do. We don't, and this is what this insight is trying to communicate to us, that we don't exist separate from what we do in some kind of abstract way. We don't have this kind of fixed, unchanging soul which lies within us. We're purely dynamic, you could say. So we start seeing that this idea of change, which we've talked about a bit, is when we really see that, when we really know that, and when we really live from that, that you just get this kind of pure responsiveness, which will express itself in attitudes like generosity and kindness. There's another little question here. Would it be possible to extend the time we have in groups? We don't seem to have time for discussion of issues arising by the time we each talk about our practices. Would be useful to have some time for feedback. Many thanks. Yeah, the groups are even longer today, but we could have them a bit longer. So let's see. I'll talk to the group leaders next week about that. But thanks for that feedback. That's helpful. Another question. Could you expand on the meditation home practice? Are we to increase the time spent just sitting and check in with ourselves? Basically, yeah, what I'm suggesting. It might be that you don't have what I'm suggesting is you sit down to meditate and you enter into a practice like the mindfulness of breathing and the Metta Bhavana. And then at the end, you just sit. So if you're already doing that, you might like to extend that period. Or you might like to just see if you can deepen that, to see if you can let go more fully. One way that Maitreya Bandhu suggests is by, when we just sit, spend a bit of time just trying to relax. Just notice, which means noticing tension and seeing if you can let go of it. So that can be a really good way of just sitting, is just to try and drop everything, just drop down into the heart, as one person once said on a meditation retreat I was on. Just sort of let go more deeply. But also I think what I'm saying is in the practice itself, see if you can kind of let go of the structure of it a bit. Don't sort of grip on to the different stages so forcefully, and just trying to open to the experience that's unfolding. And then it will hopefully be more kind of genuinely creative, rather than just sort of a forced move through a particular kind of sequence of exercises. And then someone's got a question. So is Buddhist ethics based on actions rather than character traits? Well, in a way, I think what I'm saying is that actions and character trait, like a character trait is just kind of a repeated action, if you see what I mean. So we become a particular kind of person through doing the same thing over and over again. And then we think, I've got a character trait, but there's nothing fixed within that. It's just a habit that we've gotten into. And because we've gotten into it, if it's a good character trait, we can develop it. And if it's a bad one, we can try to minimize the amount of energy that we put into it, that we try and minimize acting out of that. So hopefully that all makes sense. We've just run out of time. So this week, just read the book. It's important, I think. These are some quite difficult ideas to get hold of. So it's quite important to read the book, and do come with questions next week if you have questions. And read the receptivity sections as well. And if you've got more questions, I realize that might have raised all kinds of questions for people. And if it did, well, great. And if you do have questions, just hang on the line, and I'll be here for the next 15 minutes or so, and we can just see if there's any other things that cropped up. So, for example, if some of those things that I was answering were questions that you've asked, and if the answer that I made wasn't adequate, or you'd like to hear more, do please hang on the line. But other than that, we'll see you next week.